re-recording this intro, so if it doesn't fit perfectly, my bad. But this guy is basically just a guy that's technically does not have a key to the throne, but got kidnapped by some white Ruder generals that resisted him, and then they put him as a puppet czar, and he is just a guy that barely knows Russian, and he's kind of stuck there, and has no real power.
So this is more just, Michael basically went to the royal palace, which is just a inn or something like that, and he's just a figurehead, but he was walking around the city, and he's like, kind of feels pride in the little city, safe city he's made, or that he's the reluctant czar of. The web weaver. From a distance, Ivan Mikhailov observed as people hurried about from place to place in the market. He heard the vendors cry out, the haggling customers, the indistinct chatter of the crowd. Yes, this is where he ruled. This was his domain. Though currently not entirely thanks to Semyonov and Shipunov and their ilk, more and more they overruled his decisions and took over his portfolio. He supposed he had never gotten along too well with the general staff. They were going too far. Somebody needed to put a stop to their control over the government, and Mikhailov knew exactly who that somebody would be. Himself, of course. If he couldn't convince Semyonov to loosen his grip, then he might have to resort to more drastic measures. Some freedom would do the people of Chita good, just as it did the economy, even if his plans for a free economy kept making things worse, if the slander spread by other economists was to believe. No matter, he just had to try and try again, and eventually he'd show them all. No matter how many times he'd have to start over. A free economy is good if you have a big industrial base with a lot of resources. You're fucking Chita, a warlord state. I feel like a highly centralized kind of economy probably would be the best for a state like this, until it was an open market. But that is just my thinking of a 18-year-old in high school. Directing the budget. Our young empire has limited resources, and hard choices will have to be made. We must decide which sector of our nation will receive to be made. What the fuck? Nation will receive majority of government funding. While we could attempt to balance our efforts, such an approach risks an unacceptable dilution of effectiveness. Tsar Mikhail has voiced his preference for funding the so-called loyalists. They wish to focus on developing Chita's infrastructure and expanding its industrial base. To do this, however, much needed funding will have to be diverted from the military, a dangerous prospect in these desperate times. Ivan Mikhailov, the Minister of Finance, has together with the General Staff proposed alternative idea. They believe that civil spending should not be our priority until the region is united, and all that funding should be diverted to the military until unification is achieved. Although the civilian budget will suffer in the short term, a powerful army may be necessary. I'm going for the Tsar, so yeah, the Tsar's investments. The Kingmaker. Leaning back in the chair in his study, Boris Shepunov contemplated all the change that would soon come. The accursed fascists to the east, the thrice damned Bolsheviks to the west, two sides of the same hated coin, both seeking to bring down the illegitimate government in Chita. There were countless internal troubles too, a pathetic czar, unending unrest, and seemingly eternal lack of funds. On top of all this, he had already figured that Semyonov was 1 foot in the grave. It was become a real mess of problems. However, it was his mess to resolve, and he would bring down anyone who disagreed with it. Even in the unlikely event, it meant facing the Tsar himself. Once the dominance of the White Army, and himself by extension, was secured, and the unrest suppressed, order would surely follow the long arm of imperial law. Across the Far East, only then would peace begin to come to Russia. Then, as the twin evils of fascism and Bolshevism fell to the ground, like coins, Shepunov would watch, just as he had with the fascists all those years back in Harbin. This time, he would make sure they stayed dead, as they lay dying before him, he would finally smile. This guy's fucking badass, dude. I would go with him if his path was probably interesting, but it's not, probably. I would not. It's probably just another, like, I don't know, not too interesting one. Passing the torch. You asked to see me, sir? General Shepnov asked, standing face to face with his superior in the doorway. The old Ottoman, who leaned on an intricately designed cane, looked as though he had one foot in the grave. The year had clearly not been kind to the man who once defied the red behemoth so many years ago. Indeed, please come and take a seat, Ottoman Semyonov said, weakly, his voice almost a whisper. Shepyonov didn't as he said, and took position on a dusty vintage sofa by the fireplace. The old man took longer, bones audibly creaking as he sat across from his protege. Boris, I'll get right to the point. I don't have nearly as much time to waste on platitudes these days, Semyonov ended off with a chuckle, which quickly transformed into a messy cough. That makes two of us, Gregory. Just tell me what you need of me. Boris, my time is running out. It shames me deeply that I won't be able to see Russia cleanse of the Red Menace in my lifetime, but perhaps I can rest more peacefully, knowing that the struggle will continue without me. Semyonov leaned forward. When the time comes, I want you to take my place. Shepyonov was speechless. He had long followed in Semyonov's footsteps, but to take his place? Grigory, I would be honored, but are you absolutely sure about this? I'm the one you want. I have decades to think it over, Boris. Nobody truly understands what this movement means, like you and I do. Anyone can bring order back to the sacred motherland. If anyone could, it is you. Shepyonov's eyes, filled with renewed purpose, met the Ottoman's. I won't let you down, sir. The young general, sitting at his desk, Dmitry Volkanov, finished the latest stack of paperwork before him. His writing fluid and quick, armaments requisition forms. So this is just saying the officers are giving him a bunch of work because he's too good. A young officer under his command opened the door and saluted, making Volkanov look up immediately. He felt like he knew what this was about and developed a sense of dread. Sir, an officer got into a fight with a civilian while drunk. He's from your command, so if his punishment is up for you to decide. Letting out a long sigh, Volkanov stood up and walked towards the officer. He didn't know if he was sighing in relief that it hadn't been as bad as he expected, or exasperation that this was the third incident involving tensions between the soldiers and civilians this week. He just wished that the army and generals like Semyonov and Shupanov in particular would come to his senses and realize they were meant to help the people, not hurt them. Very well, lead the way. The officer frowned and looked at Volkanov strangely. Sir, permission to speak freely? At Volkanov's slight nod, he continued. Have you been sleeping well? You look terrible. It has been a long day. Damn, bro. Dear Father, it's been some time since we've spoken, yes. In the past, I haven't had much opportunity to write to you, and for that I sincerely apologize. My life has grown stranger over the years, and I feel as though I have no avenue through which to vent my frustrations. You are the one of the wisest men I've ever known, and I hope you can find it in you to give your foolish son good counsel. God damn these loud noises. As you know, I spent much of my life in Australia after serving with the Fleet Air Arm. It was one of the happiest periods of my life, and regrettably the situation has changed for the worse. Several years ago, I got an invitation from a group of Russian immigrants in Harbin to attend a banquet celebrating the legacy of the Romanov family. It seemed like a quaint affair, an opportunity to celebrate my lineage, but instead I found myself having a crown placed atop of my head in the city of Chita. Deep in the Siberian wastes, as I write, I still remain in Russia many years after I left for Harbin. The emperor of a realm I have no real interest in ruling. This place is horrible, Father. I have no real power, and these old whites do not care about me or my well-being. The only thing they do care about is using my name to legitimize their barbaric wars and atrocities that follow. If I attempt to make a decision, they look at me as though I have 3 eyes. This land is cold and harsh, and I miss Australia every day. I feel a deep pain in my heart when I think of the wife I left behind. You are the only one I can think of to turn to, Father. I am locked inside a golden cage, in a land that is foreign to me, and I do not know what to do. If nothing else, I can only ask that you forgive your son for being so stupid as to find himself in a situation such as this. Signed, Michael. Damn, Michael, bruh. Oh, yeah, so he didn't even use his Russian name. He used actual Michael, not Mikhail. This is just like some industrial aid for Manchuria with Japanese approval. That's all it is. So this is just a popular mayor that's like nice to everybody, but the soldiers are making him
Another tax increase. Who's really in charge of the town?
the death of the Ottoman. Most unfortunate news have arrived from Chita, the capital of Russian monarchism in the Far East. So now known as the Ottoman, has passed away from natural causes at the age of 71. A popular figure in Chita and a valuable ally of Tsar Mikhail, he had departed this world to join many predeceased, I don't think that's how you say that, but comrades. Born in Transbaikal in 1890, Simonov was first distinguished himself in the old Tsar's Cossack legions during the Great War. When the Civil War began, he organized some of the first anti-Bolshevik revolutions in the Transbaikal, and with the help of both Czechoslovak legions and the Japanese, managed to seize both Chita and the surrounding regions. There he held out against the Soviets even as the rest of the white movement crumbled, before being forced to flee into Manchuria. Decades later, as a leader of the Image community in Harbin, he became the leader of the Japanese-supported anti-Bolshevik front and rose to the Industry bubble, we know this, village. While dangerous close to the frontier, the socialist revolutionaries, thousands of people and peasants, he defended his motherland until his last moments. And now this is the difference. Yeah, he's not in my army. Where? Is that not who died? Okay, no, he is dead. He's just not dead. My field marshals, funnily enough. Changing of the guard. The news of Gregory Semyonov's death had filled Tsar Mikhail II with apprehension. The man had all but kidnapped him, carrying him along as a puppet to the frozen city of Chita, and yet he had been a known quality. Mikhail had known where he stood. He could not say the same of Semyonov's replacement, both as interim prime minister and as commander-in-chief of the military as a whole. Boris Shepunov, he knew of the general, of course, Semyonov's long-serving protege, and had interacted with him before, but never in such a political capacity. Shepunov had spoken grandly at Semyonov's funeral, eulogizing the man and proclaiming his greatness, no doubt already knowing that he would be stepping forward to fill the power vacuum. Mikhail was sure that he had equally grand plans. The White Army always did, especially when they involved him, which was why on this very day he was formally invited Shepunov to take over the government. He had to fight hard to keep his expression neutral. The man's entire demeanor was entirely different. He walked differently, spoke differently. His eyes even seemed to have, if possible, gotten even colder than he had remembered. As Shepunov thanked him for his confidence and turned to leave, no doubt to execute whatever plans he had already made, Mikhail could no longer prevent a grimace from crossing his face. What was to come, and what did it mean for him? Will he be any different? I kind of feel bad because in my other playthrough, Reform the USSR, I sent this guy to like however many years in labor. This guy literally got kidnapped. I didn't realize he like literally got kidnapped. That's pretty bad. The Tsar and the general. So went Boris Shepunov, hands folded neatly on his desk. So went Mikhail, his new puppet, nervously gripping the rests of his chair. As you are aware, I am now your interim prime minister, as well as the commander-in-chief of the White Army. I shall be taking on all other duties handled by my predecessor as well. Rest assured that that's rather well as well. Swell, Commander Shepunov, but I've been meaning to ask you something for a while. Yes, my Tsar? Shepunov asked, his face twitching ever so slightly. He despised being interrupted, especially by someone like the human weasel sitting in front of him. I was wondering, hypothetically, what if I didn't want to stay here, in Russia, I mean? What are you saying? You're the Tsar. You cannot leave. Shepunov raised an eyebrow. I don't like it here, Shepunov. Please, if you would. Let's make one thing perfectly clear, Majesty. You are going to be staying here in Russia for as long as the crown rests upon your head, and I would suggest strongly to put to bed any thoughts of abandoning your destiny. Mikhail wilted as his new overseer spoke and retreated into his usual defeated silence. Whatever slim hope remained within the puppet Tsar was all crushed into dust in that instant. The Tsar is tired. Please see him to his quarters. Bruh, this guy, he just wants to be home. Or just, not be a fucking puppet. It's so ass. Dear Father, I never got a response to my last letter, and I can't help but to think that means either you never received it or are too intensely disappointed in your son to craft a response. I wouldn't blame you. What I did was foolish and deeply unbecoming of one such as myself, and I should have known better. I should have chosen better, but what's done is done, and now I have no choice but to face the hell of my own making. I sincerely regret once again troubling you with my problems, but in truth I have nobody else to turn to. This land is foreign and cruel. I have no friends, only scores of villainous men who pretend to respect me in public, and no doubt mock me in private. I am a living, walking joke. They call me Tsar, but everyone knows the truth. I'm a puppet, a figurehead. I'm now convinced that Russia is one of the worst places on earth. The nights are long, the winters are longer, and the people of this land are terrible, irritable, and violent. I have gained newfound respect for my forefathers, who somehow managed to keep this godforsaken frozen hell under control. My armies have seen a great many victories, but I cannot share their enthusiasm. How can I? They claim to be fighting on my behalf, but this is not true. They do not fight for me. They fight for the idea I've been chosen to represent, and for the men who hold me captive. I desperately want to leave, but I cannot. I am kept under house arrest, in all but name, a glorified pet to these relics. I beg of you, if you cannot show pity, at least tell me what I could do to try to pull something positive out of this pit I find myself in. Signed, Michael. Dude, I'm really feeling bad. I feel especially bad that I sent this guy to labor camp, dude. He really just wanted to go home. An offer from the moderates. An unexpected visitor has come to Chita, requesting talks with the government. This particular visitor happens to represent Mikhail Makovsky's wing of the Russian Fascist Party, and he claims that a conflict between the fascists ceasefire, better focus on the enemy at hand. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Reclaiming the wilderness. Exiting his lodge with a fishing rod in hand, Kirill surveyed the landscape before him. It was another beautiful, picturesque day in the unspoiled Siberian wilderness. The rest of Russia was going through hell, but as far as Kirill was concerned, this place was paradise on earth. At least that it was, until Kirill spotted a pillar of black smoke rising from the tree line. Looking more closely, he thought he saw distant trees beginning tumbling down and flocks of birds frantically flying away. What the hell? Kirill exclaimed, throwing down his rod as he ran off to investigate. When Kirill finally arrived at the scene, it was worse than he feared. Scores of dozen workers, unorganized yet trespassing. The older gentleman turned to face a strange man approaching him from the forest. Who are you? What the hell do you want? I'm Kirill. I live back it that way, and I want to know what you're tearing down my forest. The foreman chuckled mockingly in response. Your forest? This ain't your property, pal. We checked. Kirill was visibly unsatisfied with his answer. This is where I come to hunt. I survive off this land. Who are you? Who gave you the right to come and rip it down apart? The foreman sighed. Look, we're with the Imperial Development Company. The government said we were to clear space for construction, so take it up with them. Stop wasting my time. He would spending much of his night writing angry letters. No land is safe for the march of progress. Yeah, sadly so. Probably killed 13 different endangered species with one development. We're not as bad as, like, freaking Amazon. The Amazon killings. Deforestation. Oh my, what am I saying? I'm so tired. Brotherly love. There was a little Verisayan Mustafan. There was little Verdiusuin Mustafine could not do to disguise his surprise when his little brother Leonid invited him out for drinks. While they've been close as children, they drifted apart since Semyonov had led them in retaking of Chita, and they'd both been distracted by their countless duties. Something was up, something that Vizirion supposed he'd find out once alcohol loosened Leon's tongue a bit. Ah, this place really does have the best liquor in all of the Far East. I'm certain of it, Leon exclaimed, flashing the bartender a wide grin. Ah, you've little faith, Vizirion. I'm telling you, I have a good feeling about this country's future, with Tsar Mikhail at the helm, and not that idiot old man. Soon all the finery of the world will be around us, liquor included, of course. Laughing heartily, Leonid did not notice the frown upon his brother's face. That line about Semyonov had sounded almost treasonous. Say, Leonid, when his little brother turned to him, Vizirion continued, don't get yourself too involved in the court of politics, all right? Your good feelings are sometimes right, but so are my bad feelings. And I have a really bad feeling about the way things are going. Now Leonid frowned and furrowed his brows. Maybe it can't hurt to just want more from the government, though, can it? I don't want to be a Japanese dog forever. Isn't there anything you could desire for the country, brother? All I desire is your safety. Oh, he was not happy, him talking shit about his previous master. Oh, this is the modern Beauregard guy. That happens every time. The stranger's entry, there is the name of the stranger. Chita was surprisingly simple. The White Army soldiers who stopped him at the border were more interested about the news from the west than they were his identity. He found himself on a road full of men loyal to the Tsar, outnumbered by men loyal to the White Army generals who ran the principality. Yet he could tell these divisions were fresh, exceptionally so. Something that you could take years to boil over. And back to the night when he tried to play hero, finally, deciding he was broken from his reminiscence by a scream coming from the room next door. Without hesitation, he had sprung from his bed, old service pistol in hand, and bashed it in the door to his neighbor's room. Inside, a man in a White Army uniform had pressed a young woman to the wall, his pants already around his ankles and a knife against her throat. He was barely able to turn before 3 shots rang out. The rapist fell to the floor without a sound. The girl ran out of the room and downstairs, and he sprinted back into his room. He gathered his gear, opened the window, and jumped. He would have to find another place to sleep. Desertion is often better part of valor. Yeah, no, that guy just appears in every country. War on the horizon. Mikhail II stood outside the door, the crack in which allowed the voices within to clearly be heard. His generals were holding a meeting, and the Tsar felt that it would be impolite to interrupt, feeling content to remain just outside and listen. The unmistakable voice of General Leonid Mustafan spoke first. I'm not overly concerned by the fascist militias, but I understand Matokolsky has recruited a large mercenary force. Their experienced fighters could be a real problem for our soldiers. At the general's words, which seemed to imply conflict was about to begin, Mikhail couldn't help begin to worry. Was war really coming so soon? A second distinctive voice, that was Boris Shupanov, the army chief of staff, spoke next. I disagree, Leonid. Mercenaries want to fight bandits, not real armies. And they see our soldiers thus scatter to the wind and leave the fascists their fate. And that rabble won't stand a chance against our forces. Mikhail felt his heart sink. His suspicions were correct. Regardless what he think of his little realm was going to war. He tried not to think, but all the ways he could very poorly for him. Trying so hard, in fact, he accidentally pushed the door open. That's all well and good, said a third figure, that of General Vladimir Abernov, but we still have no plans for the occupation of these territories. How do you propose we, surprised at the appearance of the sovereign? Abernov trailed off. The generals turned their petition to Mikhail. Shupranov was the first to speak. Your Imperial Majesty, we have exciting news. The pen is set aside, and the sword shall be drawn. Okay. Oh, they refused. We're about to smoke them for that, because they suck balls. 7 counts. The calm before the storm. For a very long time, the poorly marked border zone between the Transcarpathian Principality and the lands belonging to the Russian Fascist Party saw little traffic. That had changed seemingly overnight. Tsar's troops have established a formidable presence, constructing roads, ammunition depots, and more, visibly and openly preparing for armed conflict. Corporal Frodovochit was no fool. He knew that these exercises were not for show. The battle was another month, taking a long drag, and hearing footsteps, so he did. Fedorovich raised his head and saw his squad leader. "Good morning, Corporal," the sergeant said. "Got a light?" Fedorovich nodded, lighting a cigarette as asked. The sergeant looked to the east as he took a drag past the small creek that had substituted as a border marker distant mountains. Angry fascists. Fedorovich remained silent as he followed the sergeant's gaze. "I'm not gonna lie, Corporal, it's gonna be rough. They're gonna throw everything they got at us. We're gonna take losses, there's no avoiding it, so prepare yourself while you still can, and if the time comes, make sure to take as many fascists down as possible. Forget the mountains. That's time. The rest of the men." Fedorovich appreciated the small talk, but his anxiety hadn't waned. Death lay just over the horizon, and the corporal wasn't ready to face it. But now we win these. A lonely evening. The Tsar's palace was a lonely place, more so at night. When Mikhail had first moved in, things had been different. Early sleeps turned into early mornings, and he hardly ever noticed the hugeness and the emptiness of the palace, or the place. But as days turned into months, that turned into years, things began to change. Late, sleepless, silent nights blended into lethargic, lonely days. More and more alcohol was brought into the palace, and everyone knew who was consuming it. He had bodyguards, sure, faceless children of images, but Mikhail knew he couldn't name a single one of them. One of these long, sleepless nights, defined by Mikhail's wonders and regret, the powerless Tsar sat in a chair overlooking a dark window he couldn't see out of. The street light outside was damaged, and the bright lights of the palace contrasted so deeply with the black night outside that Mikhail only saw his reflection. His mind wandered often, but tonight he could only think of one thing: his father. He had never endorsed Mikhail's visit to Harbin, even begging him not to go. Mikhail had attempted to write letters to his father many times, with nearly a dozen letters total written, and yet he had never received a single response. He had once been close to his father, but his deafening silence had further crippled Mikhail. With a glass full of liquor in his hands, he wondered why his father refused to respond. Was it to punish Mikhail for leaving, or perhaps he had moved on and not received the letters? A dreadful thought passed through the Tsar's mind. Maybe his father didn't care to respond at all. He finished the brown liquid in a single belt. The first of many. He was sure Mikhail missed his father. He missed his home and his family. His mind shifted to one thing: another letter. Tonight, the Tsar writes a final letter. A little slice of hell. The men of the White Army had been much in their campaigns. I've seen much in their campaigns against the fascists in Amur, but they were not prepared for what they found that day. The fascists, on the verge of total defeat, had abandoned their positions in the night, fleeing in an attempt to save themselves, advancing past their former defensive line. The unit soon encountered what they first thought, owing to the wiring fence and observation towers, to be a fortified supply depot. The towers abandoned. A small group of volunteers breached the main gate under close supervision. Shortly thereafter, they returned, their faces white. The rest of the unit soon discovered why. The compound was no supply depot. It was rather a camp for those that Ravodonsky's regime had considered undesirables of any sort, politically, socially, ethically, religiously, or any reason at all. The camp's former guards and had deserted alongside their compatriots, but they had left the prisoners behind. The shells that moved were more skeleton than human, walking around in a daze and seemingly not even able to recognize their liberators as men at all. More than one had fled in primal terror at seeing uniform, regardless of who it belonged to. 2 of them died shortly after gorging themselves on food the soldiers had provided before the unit medical officers imposed strict rationing. But the worst came when a young corporal found the graves of such scale that despite their attempts, the fascists had been unable to properly conceal them. Overcome, the corporal found himself vacating the contents of his stomach before swooning and taking much effort to revive. The unit's commander hastily dispatched messages demanding relief. He wanted his men out of this hellish place as soon as possible, for he did not know how much longer they could endure it. We once called these monsters allies. Yeah, fucking concentration camps go crazy, dude. This shit's Foreign Minister Nikolai Utwunsky drummed his fingers nervously on the desk as he stared at the phone. It was late at night, and he had foregone sleep to wait for an extremely important telephone call that he knew was coming. The air in the room was tense, the only sounds being the outside. Tomsky speaking. Did you get our telegraph? The speaker on the other end spoke perfect Russian, but with a distinctly Japanese accent. I did, Utwunsky replied. But I want to assure you that while the government in Zaya has changed, its intentions have not. The usual contacts will continue, the arrangement as is, but they will now represent us. Is that acceptable? There will be a long pause, and Utwunsky struggled to keep his nervousness in check. We had a very specific understanding with previous parties, the voice said. Does your government intend to uphold its particulars? We do so unequivocally. Very well, we will do the same. The speaker on the other end abruptly hung up. Utwunsky leaned back in his chair and let out an unrelieved sigh. The start of a beautiful relationship? We will increase Japanese support by a large amount. Nice. This is basically just saying, like, everything he did was for Russia. And, fuck you. He's a monster, basically. And National Socialism is no more my party. The trial of Mikhail Matakovsky. Mikhail Alexeyevich Matakovsky, leader of the Russian Fascist Party. You've been accused of heinous crimes against Russia and our people. What do you say in your defense? For a moment, Matakovsky remained silent. He tried his best to maintain his composure to preserve some small shred of dignity, but the situation made it rather difficult. I wish to say that it was never my intention to cause harm to Russia. I only did what I thought was necessary to bring strength and unity back to this broken nation. And at the very least, I would argue that my government was far more legitimate than any of this sham of a trial. Matakovsky almost immediately was showered with jeers nearly from everyone present in the trial. He attempted to dodge the vegetables being thrown at him in the gallery, but found it difficult with guards restraining him. One of the prosecution, who almost entirely consisted of members of Chita's general staff, used this opportunity to lash out. Mr. Matakovsky, I'm sure you are aware your father died bravely against the Bolsheviks during the Civil War. And what was his son accomplished? Standing here accused as a war criminal and a fascist tyrant, Mikhail Alexeyevich, your disgrace to your father's legacy, a disgrace to our movement. I would go so far to declare you are undeserving of wielding a very name of Matakovsky. Matakovsky, who is still preoccupied with objects being hurled his way from the gallery, scoffed at this accusation. With order. Yeah, you're dead, bro. Fascists are el bozos. Life under the Tsar. So this is after disbanding the fascist party. Sophia continuously made her way down the sidewalk, doing her best not to draw attention to herself, as she tried to get home with her groceries. It had never been a safe walk the streets of Zaya before the war, and she saw no reason why it would change just now. Just a few minutes but more, and her apartment would be in sight. Excuse me, ma'am. Could I have a moment? The voice coming from behind stopped Sophia in her tracks. It had to belong to a soldier. No civilian in Zaya would stop another on the street so casually. Slowly turning around, her heart sank as her suspicions were confirmed. A young Tsarist soldier stood there, awaiting an answer, though. The uniform was different. The gun slung over his shoulder had become synonymous with oppression and abuse under the fascist regime, and she mentally prepared herself for what was to come. "Apologies, ma'am, but I saw your bag, and I was wondering if you knew where I could find this grocer." He smiled at her apologetically. This town is like a maze. Taken aback by the polite nature of the soldier's request, Sophia replied cautiously, "Of course, it's on the corner of the intersection just ahead. Just follow the sidewalk from where I came. You can't miss it." The soldier nodded his head in response as he moved to follow her direction. "Thank you, ma'am. Carry on." As the soldier departed, Sophia sighed in relief and hurriedly continued towards her apartment. Such a peaceful exchange would never have happened under the fascists, who were more gangster than soldier. Sophie was still nervous about having armed men watching her every move, but maybe things were changing for the better. Time will tell. That's one thing that also makes me happy. Every time, you get liberated from a shitty-ass country, Chita's a shitty country, but, Nazi, Aryan Brotherhood level fucking shitty. Anytime they get liberated from that, they're always just oh my goodness, peace at last. That fills me with a little bit of joy. The execution of Valery Soblin. Any last words, Bolshevik? Valery Soblin, now a disheveled, defeated shell of his former appearance, looked up at his captors. Their guns were now trained on him, and there was no doubt in Soblin's mind they were intended to do. "Speak, Red. You won't get another chance." This time Soblin decided to humor their taunting demands. "So this is what it has come to. The war is lost, and I am to die in this dusty basement for my trouble. It's funny, I always thought I'd be executed by the NKVD, as some Tsarist relics." Soblin attempted to stand up straight and look his executioners in the eyes. It was harder than it looked, for the would-be revolutionary was greatly weakened from his time in captivity. "You Tsarist bastards think killing me is going to end the revolution? Have you learned nothing? The people of Russia will never accept a revolutionary monarch, or a reactionary monarch. Soon enough, they'll remember all over again why the revolution happened. And when that day comes, another will rise in my place to avenge me and the rest of my comrades. Do your worst, but know that it's going to take a lot more than killing me to crush the revolutionary spirit in the people. This isn't over. Not without warning, the impatient Tsarist executioners opened fire and prematurely ended Zoblin's defiant last speech." Shit. Dude, I played as that guy last time. He was sick. He was a good dude. He didn't even kill any guy, people like that, really. Except he just sent him in the fucking work camps over and over again. Which is really not as bad as getting fucking murked for your beliefs. I feel like work camped. I don't know. I'm lazy as fuck. I might rather be murdered. The Heretics' Trial. In their attempt to unify the Far East, the White Army had expected and trained to fight both communists and fascists. They had not expected or trained to fight religious extremists of the North, but fight them they did. Defeated them they had, even through defections in their own ranks, peasant rebellions behind the lines, and truly difficult territory. They had defeated the fanatics in the field, further upon capturing Alaman. They had also captured the leader, their enigmatic priest, Alexander Men. At the decision of the central government, Men had been placed on trial. The entire process had proven far more difficult than anticipated, because Men would not speak, not a single word, through pre-trial motions, opening statements, evidence presentation, cross-examination, and the like. He had remained entirely silent. This was causing problems for the state as a whole. The sentiments that Men had spoke to in so much of the royal population still existed, and without any response from him, the trial increasingly looked little more than one for show. Were he to be found guilty, as had been intended, and given appropriate punishment, he would undoubtedly be considered by many as a martyr, and could not be permitted if stability was to be preserved. Therefore, the decision had been made and conveyed by proper means. Men was to be found guilty on some, but not on all charges, and giving a lengthy prison sentence. There would be unrest, but in time, and as the government solidified internal control, people would forget about the priest rotting silently, if desired, in his cell, and at the point the sentence could easily be extended indefinitely or restored to that as originally intended. Martyrdom shall be denied.
You know you can't get.
A morning chat. Mikhail II had spent his morning wandering the gardens of his estate. Lost in thought, his mind carried a heavy burden than usual, as recent revelations had caused the Tsar much grief. Was there a single man he could trust? "Good morning, Your Majesty," the familiar voice broke his reverie. Turning, Mikhail turned to the great Ivan Mikhailovich, his Minister of Finance. "What a welcome surprise," Mikhailovich said, beaming. "Majesty, would you care to join me? I find a morning stroll is better with company." Although Mikhail did not fully understand why his minister was in his private residence, uninvited, he nodded, and the two men began to walk. Alike in mind and outlook, minutes passed as though they were seconds, while the two spoke, and the subject quickly turned to political matters. "I swear," Mikhailovich began, "some days I would rather cast myself into the Lake Baikal than continue to haggle with our generals." Mikhail cast a brief, nervous glance around before he replied, "It could be worse, I suppose, but days, they don't even let me leave this house." Mikhailov's pace slowed. "There are many things in this land that simply do not make sense. Majesty, the military holds even more influence than you think." Mikhailov's pace slowed to a stop, and Mikhail watched with concern as the minister cast his own nervous glance around. I fear I may have said too much. My Tsar, I should leave before I am missed. We should speak again soon, preferably under less conspicuous circumstances." Standing alone once again in his garden, the troubled Tsar was more confused than ever. The plot thickens. The revelation. "And with all that said, my dear father, this shall be my final correspondence. Despite all my best efforts to reach you, it seems futile to continue attempting to do so. Both you and mother remain in my thoughts and prayers. Much love, now and forever. Michael Andreevich Romanov." Tsar Mikhail sat in his personal quarters, looking at the envelope that contained his final letter to his father. It had been artfully enclosed within the vanilla-coated envelope, the result of masterful practice and care by the Tsar. He sighed deep, long sigh of a man preoccupied with a momentous decision. Gently taking it from his desk, he left his quarters to find Fyodor Orlov, his secretary. "Mr. Orlov?" Mikhail asked quietly. As he opened the door, Orlov, sitting at his desk just outside, stood at the Tsar's entrance. "I have one more letter from my father. He hasn't responded to the others, but I had to send one more. Would you take it for me?" Orlov looked at the letter and put his hand out to receive it. But as he did, meeting the Tsar's gaze, guilt overwhelmed his features, tears welling in the young man's eyes. "What is it, Fyodor?" the Tsar asked. "Oh, my Tsar, I've done a great injustice to you," Orlov replied. Orlov proceeded to tell the Tsar his whole story. Shepunov had long been paying him to deliver Mikhail's letters to himself instead of to the post office, and on more than one occasion he had even witnessed the general burning Mikhail's letters. Hearing this, the Mikhail felt something he had not felt in a long time: rage. "I see, Fyodor. Thank you." Mikhail did not hand the letter to Orlov. Instead, he headed back into his quarters, and wasn't heard from for the rest of the day, a flicker of emotion in the quiet of depression. An evening dinner. "Tell me, Your Majesty," Ivan Mikhailov asked, dipping a spoon into his soup, "what was Australia like? You've hardly ever spoken about it." "Do you want to know the truth, Mikhailov?" The Tsar's tone was much more aggressive and authoritative than usual, and it took Milikov by surprise. "Australia was a paradise in comparison. I hate this place, Ivan.
And you know what the worst part about it is? I can't leave. No matter how hard I try, there's no way out. Mikolov was stunned, the spoon slipping from his hand. Your Majesty, Enough, Mikhail roared. I'm sick of pretending everything is fine, because it isn't. I can't even write letters to my family. Did you know that? The other day I learned my secretary was delivering all my mail to Shepunov. Don't you get it? I'm being held hostage in a country where everyone is spying on me. It's too cold, and I can't even properly speak the language. Mikolov was silent, his mouth agape. It was as if, for a few moments, the Tsar had become a completely different person. After a moment, Mikhail calmed. I'm terribly sorry, he said. That was rather undignified of me. No, Your Majesty. You speak the truth. It is a sad state of affairs, when even Russia's holy sovereign is nothing more than a slave to the whims of the military. You are the Tsar, the Emperor of all Russia. The military likes to pretend that means nothing, but they have forgotten their place. You have a God-given destiny to lead, and they have a duty to follow in your wake. A long pause followed. Perhaps it is not Russia you hate, my liege, but those who have selfishly taken advantage of her glorious legacy, your legacy. The Tsar looked distant, his mind alive with powerful thoughts. Perhaps the seeds of conspiracy have been sown. The start of something special. Boris Shepunov had come to appreciate the quiet moments, sitting alone in his office, a glass of vodka in hand. He reviewed the reports from his staff, as usual. They only had bad news, more reports about the insurgents who grow bolder day by day, more rumors about possible dissidents from the civilian administration, and much else besides. It was all so tiresome. The old general swiftly downed the glass, and as the vodka stung his throat, Shepunov wondered what the Ottoman would have thought about everything. The old Cossack always had a knack for keeping his cool, even when the situation was out of control. Now Semyonov was gone. It was up to him to clean the mess up. The general cursed himself for believing that life would become easier after his army's accomplishments. He should have known by now that victories usually raised more questions than they answered. Deep down, Shepunov truly missed those old days in Chita, riding out with Semyonov and his Cossacks on daring escapades across the Siberian tundras. There at least he knew that his enemies would face him head-on. Nowadays they hide in plain sight. Peace had made Shepunov complacent, when what he really needed was to be more vigilant than ever. Shepunov moved to refill his glass. It diverted his attention away from the weariness of the day, only for a moment. Something's amiss, but what? It's revolution, baby. You better get murdered. Or at least ousted from the government. I don't know. A legacy to consider. Presenting His Imperial Majesty Mikhail II, Emperor of all of Russia. That's not even true, but I guess in name he is Emperor of all of Russia. Mikhail emerged from his entourage, coming up within a vast row of troops that stood before him. Upon seeing their Tsar, the men stood at attention and gave their due salutes. Hail Tsar Mikhail! Despite being caught off guard by the overwhelming cry of his name, Mikhail tried his level best to maintain a dignified composure. The procedure went on as planned. As the Emperor made his way down the row, exchanging handshakes and salutes, he couldn't help but notice that these young men looked at him with a great deal of admiration, as though he were a figure of divine status. One of the officers had come, and he couldn't have been older than 20. Hail, Your Imperial Majesty! It is an honor to serve you. The young officer gave a gracious salute. Mikhail sheepishly went in for a handshake. No, the honor is all mine. I am truly grateful for your service. The Tsar gave a slight, nervous smile. He glanced back at Boris Shepunov, who was standing behind him. The old general had his arms crossed, and his impatient expression clearly indicated that he wanted Mikhail to pick up the pace. As the inspection concluded and the royal entourage made its way back to their transportation, Mikhail passed by a sight that had caught his eye. A large bronze statue depicting a heroic Cossack warrior on horseback was prominently displayed out front of the army base. Mikhail stopped briefly to examine the bronze figure. Captivated by the pose of the warrior, the Tsar imagined himself in his place, with thousands of young men looking to him for guidance in the heat of battle. A man can dream. The Tsar's speech. Mikhail couldn't help but feel embarrassed as he awaited the tutor that began teaching him Russian. Here he was, acting as a contender for the leader of all of Russia without so much as a cursory education in the language of the people he was to rule over. His advisors and he had agreed it wasn't a good look. Mikhail knew a few words and phrases, of course. He could say hello and goodbye, agree and disagree with statements, and even ask for the bathroom. He even understood Russian pretty well, being able to follow the radio programs and speeches the government played. Unfortunately, his ability to produce Russian was simply lacking. In truth, a part of him had resisted taking the time to learn the language, though he found himself changing recently. He had seen his subjects for who they really are: hard-working, caring, and accepting people. People who had band together to rebuild a farm after a raid in a house of refugees from the east, even if they didn't have the food or money to do so. People who had accepted him. And Mikhail had also seen exactly who would rule these lands if he were to leave. Men who could have an entire village sacked if it means rooting out even one perceived enemy, and they all seemed to have a lot of enemies. He began to feel some resolve, a responsibility to these generous folks who had hosted him here. He was staying here for them, and every day it seemed increasingly possible he might actually end up as ruler of Russia. He needed to be ready for that day. So there he sat, paper in hand, an eye on the clock, his foot tapping as he pondered the people of Chita. Suddenly, he heard the door click and a man come in. He looked over to Mikhail and gave a smile. Privet Mikhail Pristupin. I'm looking that up what that means. Planting the seeds. Ivan Mikolov barged into Tsar Mikhail's quarters with a briefcase hastily tucked under his arm, not even bothering to knock after peeking out his head for a quick check of the outside corridor. He shut the door and approached the seated monarch who had been awaiting him for some time. Are you sure you weren't followed? Did you make double sure? Mikhail inquired nervously as he drummed his fingers on the table. I'm positive. Let's just get this over with. I don't want to stay here any longer than I have to. Mikhailov opened his briefcase and laid several papers from within across the table, each inscribed with a list of names, clearing his throat as he took a seat across from the Tsar. The minister continued, So let's get down to business. These are lists of important people we'll need to get into contact with. It's very important you commit these names to memory. Who are these people exactly? The Tsar mused as he inspected one of the lists. Potential allies. If we're going to get rid of Shepunov, we'll need friends. If we can convince some wealthy oligarchs and disgruntled military men to join our cause, we'll be well on the road to breaking the White Army's grip. Mikhail set his paper aside. Very well. I'll see if I can't negotiate with Shepunov to allow some harmless private audiences. I suppose he doesn't need to know what's going on in them. The minister gave a devious grin. Exactly my thinking. You learn rather fast, Your Majesty. Time to spin some wibs. Movers and shakers. So, Ivan, why have you dragged us down here? I assume this isn't just to pass the time with some old friends. For a moment, Mikolov scanned his audience carefully. After calling in favors in a few well-placed words, 5 of the most powerful industrial oligarchs in Russia at Far East now sat before both of them, him and the Tsar. He would have to choose his next words with discretion. I'm afraid not, my friend. I wanted to discuss business. I'm well aware that all of you are chafing under the weight of the monstrous budget sink that is the White Army and are looking for solutions, am I correct? There was a pause amongst the oligarchs before one of them cautiously spoke up. Tell you the truth, I'm sick of it. You have no idea how much this kind of defense spending eats into a man's profits. Nothing can be done about it, though. The White Army's word is law around these parts. Our goals are aligned within. His Majesty and I seek to curb the influence of the military and return empire to civilian rule. Of course, to make this happen, we'll need friends. I thought you'd never ask. Tell us what you need, and you'll have it. Just make sure we're taken care of when this is all over, alright? The oligarch's answer was joined by several nods of agreement from his colleagues. Mikolov glanced at the Tsar and smiled as he turned his attention back towards the businessman. I think we'll have a great deal, my friends. The dollar is mightier than the sword. Mikhail's day out. Captain Igor eyed the Tsar with only a modicum of interest. As he made small talk with the factory workers, his instructions from the brass had been to make sure the Tsar doesn't get into too much trouble, and was less specific than the captain would have liked. What did they even define as trouble anyway? Igor figured it was likely one of those you'll know it when you see it scenarios. If nothing else, resting his cheek against his fist, Igor began to notice something rather peculiar about the Tsar. Babysitting Mikhail was nothing new to him, but this time there was something different about his mannerisms. He seemed energetic and talkative, and Igor could swear this was the first time he ever saw the Tsar laugh with sincerity. It felt wrong. The Tsar was a prisoner, and anybody who was anyone in this rump empire knew this fact all too well. Mikhail was always miserable. Sod. So why did he seem to have a pep in his step today? And why did it not feel right? The captain was broken out of his racing thoughts as Mikhail approached him, a smile still slathered across his face. All right, Igor, let's get out of here, shall we? Yes, of course, Your Majesty, rising to accompany the Tsar outside. He couldn't help but notice the energy he had seen in him a minute ago. It was quite prevalent in his tone of voice as well. It was both heartwarming and unsettling to see him in such a mood, and Igor knew that, if nothing else, it would make for an interesting anecdote in his next report to the command. What's gotten into him? A banquet. When it was first proclaimed, most people in the Far East regarded the principality as an oddity, as it was a doomed attempt to restore Russian monarchism, the last grasp of an ever-shrinking clique of desperate old men. Those people had been proven wrong, and with the return of the trappings of an empire to Siberia, so too did the activities of the distinguished bloodlines. Activities such as the banquet that had been announced by two of those very bloodlines, attended by the rapidly expanding upper crust of Chita society. It had been announced as a refined engagement in support and praise of the Tsar and his efforts to expand the imperial lands, as so many such events in the old empire had been. However, it quickly deteriorated as the wine and liquor began to flow freely. The first activities the Scions organized were fairly tame. Cards and other games of chance, accompanied by heavy gambling, of course. As the levels of inhibition increased, and as the wagers grew, the competitions grew more intense, with outcomes that would not be subsequently spoken of in polite company. By the night's end, several small fortunes had been won and lost. Reputations had been built and tarnished, and as all the esteemed guests and the Scions themselves could agree, the next morning a great time was had by all. At long last, proper society had returned to Chita, more like the old Russia every day. The weak link. I thank you for coming on such short notice, General. I'm sure you've been quite busy indeed these days. Mikhail said as he graciously shook hands with his guest for the evening, General Dmitry Volganov, as he sat by the Tsar's ornate dining table. Volkanov noticed that the Minister of Finance was present as well. General, so good of you to join us. I've been meaning to speak with you in person for a while now. Volganov flashed a confused smile at Mikolov. I appreciate the hospitality, sirs, but I'm not sure what we could possibly discuss that couldn't also be worked out with my superiors. Leaning forward, Mikolov continued, Oh, there's plenty. General, you've garnered a reputation as a man who tries to do the right thing, even if he has to go against the wishes of the brass, am I right? The general's eyes narrowed. What are you exactly saying? It is no secret that this empire chafes under the crushing influence of the White Army. That being said, not everyone in this military is corrupted. General, I believe that you are one of these men. You want me to go against Shepunov? I hope you realize that would be tantamount to insubordination. I'm afraid I'll have to report this. Witnessing Mikhail and his minister to go white as a sheet, the general erupted into a wheezing laughter. Not to worry, I only jest. That old fool is running this country to the ground and driving me mad in the process. Tell me where you need them, Your Majesty, and my men will be there. Quite a colorful character. A statement of intentions. It had been a long time indeed since so many eyes were on Mikhail II. Before it was a whole host of unscrupulous men thinking excitedly of all the ways they could manipulate their new puppet. This time, however, it was different. The audience before Mikhail was of real, genuine allies who saw him as how a monarch should be, a beacon of unity made flesh. Ladies and gentlemen, in this room are people of varying stripes and backgrounds. Some of you are businessmen who drove this empire's great industry forward, even in times of hardship. Some of you are politicians who seek only to represent their constituents to the best of their abilities. A few of you are officers of the White Army, the very same force that once bravely defied the Soviet usurpers so long ago. Despite these very stark contrasts between you all, we've all come here united behind a singular purpose, to take back our country from the selfish and corrupt generals who seek to transform this ancient and glorious empire into nothing more than a quasi-fascist stratocracy, with me as their helpless puppet. I'm speaking, of course, of Prime Minister Boris Shepunov. The man likes to think he has us all in his iron grip, but he will soon discover that he isn't nearly as clever as he thinks he is. Despite our differences, we will fight side by side to remove this aspiring tyrant from our midst and continue the journey towards reunification. God save Russia, one and indivisible. The applause was overwhelming, and Mikhail would have been eager to bask in his new-found glory. In the back of his mind, however, he couldn't help but worry that his captors may be listening. A bold speech. Boom, 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 boom. Excuse me. The curtain rises. Damn you, Kosov. I wanted results, not excuses. Boris Shepunov barked into his phone, his grip tightening against the plastic. I understand, sir, but I can't pull evidence out my ass. Whoever stole those weapons discovered their tracks well. Too well for us to pursue their lead any longer. This is not to say, though, that we're completely empty-handed. Shepunov raised an eyebrow. Go on, I'm listening. Something interesting came up while we were chasing ghosts in Irkutsk. Apparently, some very curious individuals have been reported making repeat visits to the Tsar's dacha. I looked into it, and it turns out they're all friends of Ivan Mikolov. The general went silent. The Minister of Finance has long been a pain in his ass, but as late, he'd been eerily calm. Did the news have anything to do with that? What business did he have with Tsar Mikhail anyway? And why didn't any of this feel right? Sir, are you there? Yes, I want you to look into the Mikolov connection, find out what he's up to, and figure out what's going on at those meetings. Don't screw this up, Kosov. You can count on it, sir. With that, Chepunov put the phone back into place. Finally, he had a solid lead. If Mikolov and the Tsar were up to no good, he was going to find out one way or another. The walls begin to close in. The curtains raise. Yeah, this is just them hurting and killing the people that are not to their party. Oh shit, the Siberian Federation's actually winning. I had to defeat them when I was playing, shoot, I don't remember who it was. It was the Irkutsk, not Irkutsk, but Boldanov. They just won't give up. Gregor's eyes darted from one end of the alley to the other. He tried his best to look as though he was in control, but in reality he was terrified. Gone were the days when he had the rest of his companions in the Russian Fascist Party could act with impunity. His two friends, however, did not seem to share the same fear. Where's your Tsar now, Jew? You thought you could come through our part of town? We still run things around here, and no war's going to change that. Gregor's friends, clad in distinctive yet poorly maintained RFP uniforms, towered over a man on the ground. They had dragged him off the street and immediately began harassing him, just like the old days. I just collect the census, the man cried. I'm not even Jewish. His pleas for clemency were met with a ferocious barrage of kicks. A shot rang out behind Gregor, drawing the attention of all three of the fascists. A pair of White Army soldiers were approaching, weapons at the ready. The sight caused Gregor's stomach to turn. Step away from him, the lead one called, and put your hands in the air now. Ah, the dogs of the Tsar are finally here, barked one of Gregor's companions. We were just having a nice chat with one of your people. Gregor could feel death bearing down upon him as he turned towards his friends. Hey, wait, we shouldn't. His thoughts and speech were interrupted as one of his friends drew their weapon. Gregor didn't even have time to call out before the soldiers fired, as the bullets tore through him, and he fell to the ground. His face landed next to that of the man his group had been terrorizing. Their war is over. Die, you fascist pigs. The Emperor's new clothes. Mikhail was expected to attend a state meeting with some foreign diplomats later today, and he had yet to pick out an outfit. Unfortunately, it seems everyone else in Chita had noticed this fact as well, and ever since the Tsar had woken up, they had been hounding him with questions as to what his wardrobe would be. Even some of the generals had been participating in this discussion and debates, much to the Tsar's worry. Was his outfit really such a big deal? The stress of the decision had left the Tsar paralyzed within his bedchamber. A variety of outfits laid out upon his bed. Some of the generals argued that a simple suit, this is so silly, made Mikhail's wife away from him. Proper and glory would work best would still whirled away from him. Luckily for Mikhail, his paralysis was resolved by an exasperated Chepunov who barged into the bedchamber, chose a fairly elaborate outfit, and threw the rest haphazardly into Mikhail's closet. He reminded Mikhail that he had only had a few hours left to prepare, and slammed the door shut before he could respond. Mikhail couldn't even pick out his own outfit, and yet he was supposed to rule all of Russia. Have you ever tried simply going naked? That should shut them up. The comeback tour. The warehouse was filled with a buzzing tension that always filled the Sabinite headquarters. The prospect of a white crackdown was never far from the minds of those assembled, and each and every member of the underground had sworn oaths, both to one another and to absolute secrecy. How then did the Okarana know exactly where to find them? The door flew off the hinges as the Tsar's death squad stormed inside. The Sablanites scrambled for their weapons. Vasily, Kataya, and Boris died in the first few seconds, soft lungs, hearts, and hard heads becoming like dripping roses in the answer to the Tsar's bullets. An errand round tore through the portrait of Sablin. Didn't this guy already die? I'm so confused. Oh, these are like the comeback people. Okay. Every communist bandit was accounted for, either dead or in the tender clutches of the Okarana. Blood dripped down the fallen portrait. If anyone had bothered to look, they might have thought Sabin was a weeping blood. The white terror returns.
When Boris Shepunov awoke to the shrill sounds of ringing, he was immediately surprised to find it was still nearly pitch black in his room. The cacophonous ringing was not coming from his alarm clock, but from the phone by his nightstand. Muttering incoherently as he rose from bed, the half-conscious Shepunov stumbled clumsily through the dark towards the phone, not even bothering to turn on the lights. Who the fuck is this? Do you have any idea how late it is? Apologies, sir. It's Kosovov. I have information on the Mikhailov case. You'll want to hear it. And you couldn't wait until morning to tell me? Shepunov sighed. Just tell me what you've learned. I've just received a report from Okrana. It's rather conclusive, there's no doubt about it. Mikhailov and his allies have been behind all the recent incidents lately. Worse still, we have reason to believe that he's in league with the Tsar for some kind of action against the government. I'll have the full report to you tomorrow. Shepunov felt a shiver, and it wasn't from the cold. Very well, Kozov. Keep up the good work. As he returned to bed, the old general found it rather hard to return to his slumber. He had just learned that the nucleus of his movement was now partially and potentially plotting against him. And after all of his hard work, it seemed that the White Russia was already poised to tear itself apart. When the sun rose that morning, Shepunov had not managed to get any more rest. His greatest challenge yet were close at hand. The future of Russia will be decided. It'll be decided and the Tsar will take power. The game plan. With General Volganov's units will overrun and take control over the government's apparatus in every major city and cripple their ability to respond quickly enough. With the guns we've procured, we might even be able to arm some paramilitaries to pick up the slack. Volganov stared at the map. He and the others stood around with narrow eyes, his arms crossed. I apologize, Mikhailov, but I think you're forgetting something. Shepunov still outnumbers us by a significant margin, even with my units in play, and those of anyone else I can convince to join you. We're still not in a good position here. I agree with General Mikhail II began. We can't just hope to occupy every city when Shepunov has such an advantage. I have a feeling we're inviting disaster. Mikhailov sighed as he stepped away from the map. All due respect, gentlemen, but disaster is assured if we start getting pessimistic like this. Shepunov may have more troops, yes. We have the element of surprise. If we struck hard and fast enough, the bald bastard won't even know what's happening until it's too late. Volganov shot a concerned glance in Mikhail's direction and was met in kind. The Minister of Finance was nothing if not motivated, but the other two were beginning to wonder just how well he understood the realities of the situation. The plotters had gathered quite a following, but would it be enough to face the White Army's overwhelming might? Perhaps a plan B is in order. I would say so, especially now that they know of our freaking descent. Despite his unfortunate circumstances, Mikhail began to feel less and less like a prisoner with each passing day. He still wasn't allowed to leave the dacha very often, but he took solace in the fact perhaps it wouldn't stay that way for long. Indeed, his harebrained scheme to take his rightful place as Tsar, hatched with the Minister of Finance, was finally coming to fruition. Even now, loyal White Army units under General Volganov were preparing for the moment when the die would be cast, and Mikhail would make his move against his captor. However, if Mikhail had grown less nervous over the outcome of the coup, that would not be the truth. He still is just as nervous as before. The general, too, had expressed doubts on the feasibility of the plot, especially under such short window of time. What if Volganov was right? What if Mikhailov's plan was too bold to work, and Shepunov's clique was able to leverage their considerable numerical advantage to rein the initiative? Worse still, what would become of Mikhail should the plan fail? Would Shepunov take pity upon him and send him home Or did he have a more violent fate in mind? These questions are more weighed heavily on the captive czar's mind. Perhaps he thought he had simply spent too much time preparing and overthinking variables that were out of his control. Maybe it was time to kick back and breathe easy for a while. It's been some time since Mikhail had invited Ivan Mikolov over for dinner. A quiet evening among friends might just be what needs to be done to clear his weary mind. A chance to take a breather. You need to take a few breathers if you're doing an armed invasion. Can't use all your brain power on doing, not knowing what's going to happen. A quiet dinner. Mikhail stared down at his soup. His appetite had left him. Despite his best efforts, he could not stop thinking about everything that could go wrong. The Tsar's guest for the evening, Ivan Mikolov, clearly still possessed his own appetite. But the usually chatty minister was abnormally somber today. "Your Majesty," Mikolov said, looking at him, "you must eat. I cannot afford you to starve now. There is much to do." Seeing the Tsar look the Tsar that gave him, Mikolov continued, "Do not worry yourself, my liege. Everything is in motion. All that remains now is to have faith in our success." Mikolov set his spoon down, and as he did so, both men noticed that it, along with all the other silverware, had begun to vibrate from outside. A deep rumbling could be heard. Both Mikhail and Mikolov run in unison, their minds beginning to race. Pulling aside the curtains, they were greeted with a sight that made their blood run cold. Trucks and armored cars, carriers, or disorganized dozens of soldiers with the insignia of the city garrison, and they were moving to encircle the residence. And at the front gate, Boris Shepyunov himself stood by while an enraged subordinate screamed at the guard commander. The men backed away from the window and looked at each other. "That's it, isn't it?" the Tsar said, his voice a near whisper. "Shepyunov found us. We've arrived at the precipice." Wait, should I mess up? An end of an era. Boris Shepyunov sternly examined the scene that lay before him. His troops had the Tsar's dacha utterly surrounded. The rats were cornered in their holes. Only a token force of Imperial Honor Guard and a few conscientious young officers stood between him and those who had conspired against the state. The old general prepared to make his intentions known. "Attention, all who serve the Tsar. We are here only to execute the will of the Russian state. Mikhail Alderich has thrown his lot with the treasonous elements and has forsaken his holy vows to protect Russia and her people. Stand down at once." The Tsar's loyalists did not budge. Stand down at once. The Tsar's loyalists did not budge. Shepyunov, not bulge, could not take their defiance any longer. "Enough of this farce, General Volganov. Order your men to attack. This ends today." "No, I'm afraid I can't do that, sir." "What the fuck?" Turning to face his subordinates, he had met instead with the barrel of a gun. Volganov had his sidearm pointed directly at his face. What the hell are you doing?" General Shchepinov's voice, usually stern and decisive, now bore a rarely seen panic. "Boris Shepyunov is the name of His Imperial Majesty. In the name of His Imperial Majesty, Mikhail II, I am placing you under arrest." Shepyunov's world was turned upside down. In only a few seconds, Volganov's soldiers had turned their sights inwards and began violently detaining any units present who answered to Shepyunov. "You too, Volganov? No, this can't be." Words had finally failed him. The Prime Minister and commander of the White Army, formerly the most powerful man in the empire, felt his knees give out as the soldiers cuffed his hands. Almost as soon as it had begun, his ironclad reign had come to an end. The chains are broken. Mikhail is no longer a puppet czar, or is he reluctant in ruling? A generational divide? No. If we do that, We'll leave our flanks exposed and open, a perfect opportunity for the enemy to encircle and destroy our forces in detail. The man speaking was old, that much was obvious, the graying hair and callous skin leaving nothing to chance. But his eyes were still sharp, a piercing stare that had carried him from the Siberian ice march to the reconquest of the East, a chest of campaign ribbons leaving no doubt to his record. You said you were Russian? Are you sure? I'm positive. His English was so broken we couldn't understand him. We had to find someone in the building who spoke Russian to find out what he wanted. Send him in. Although the ambassador was confused, his curiosity was piqued. It had been some time since the ambassador had brushed up on his Russian, but he was confident he knew enough to conduct diplomacy. After a few quiet moments, the mysterious emissary entered the ambassador's office. Salutations. I represent His Majesty Mikhail II, Emperor of all of Russia. I come to you today to request official diplomatic recognition from the United States as the true government of Russia. The ambassador was completely overwhelmed by what he just heard. Hey, slow down there, pal. You said represent you as the emperor? Represent as an emperor? Indeed, on behalf of their divinely chosen emperor, Mikhail II, the White Army wrested eastern Siberia away from the fascist and Bolshevik tyrants. Now that our position is secure, we wish to obtain recognition as the legitimate government we are. The answer only raised more questions. The ambassador was going to have to call someone about this, but first he had to get this strange Russian man out of his office. Well, I'm afraid there's not much I can do, seeing my job is to handle relationships with Japan, but I can make some calls to the State Department on your behalf. So, do you have any questions? Nice. We captured all of Siberia. To West Russia we go. A new government. General Volganov, I understand you wanted to see me. Indeed, have a seat, Mr. Sobchak, Volganov said as he gestured towards the chair facing his desk. His guest obliged without hesitation. I apologize, Mr. Sobak, but I'm here to cut right to the point. Understand that formalities were never my strong suit. I do not intend for this emergency government to last forever. Now that the dust has settled, I believe the time is right to begin the transition towards civilian administration. Sobchak raised an eyebrow. I see, and I suppose you think I'm the best candidate to lead this administration? You catch on fast, don't you? That was the idea, yes. Your tenure as the mayor of Chita was nothing short of exemplary, and a fine example of statesmanship. We could use that kind of skill in the national government. What do you say, Sobchak? Are you ready to move up in the world? A grin crept across his face. You'd waited for this moment for years. It would be my pleasure. The man with the plan. I must admit, Volganov, these are quite ambitious, if I must say so myself, said Mikhail. He read over the plan, his mind wandering over the possibilities. It is true, Your Excellency, but a necessity. The army has been plagued too long by politics. While it will be hard, especially as it will rid us some really useful people, it will do our nation much more good than bad. Mikhail nodded in agreement and turned to Anatoly Sobchak, the soon-to-be Prime Minister of the Duma. What do you think, Mr. Sobchak? With all due respect, began Sobchak, pushing the documents across the table. Volganov. Well, I do agree this plan will work as intended. I don't find myself agreeing with the objectives. Mikhail raised an eyebrow, looking at Volganov for a moment, before turning back to Sobchak. Go on. I wish to hear your reasons. Your Excellency, I disagree with this because making an army loyal to your country, as well as the Tsar, is what allowed for such people as Shupanov believing themselves above their station in the name of protecting the people. While I do believe that some excesses should be curbed, by and large the army should be loyal to the Tsar and his will. That is nonsense, responded Volganov, his voice raising. The reason people like Shobanov had such influence is because they had His Excellency as a figurehead, using him as another term for the nation rather than their own personal interests. By combining them as the same, we can avoid that from ever happening again.
Subject laughed. Irrational nonsense. Explain away, Mr. Subject. I'd love to hear. Stop, screamed Mikhail, slamming his hands on the table. I will not hear of this subject. While I do find your reasons compelling, I find my own experiences have outweighed such positions. I will stand by Volganov 100%, and I expect you to go through with that plan, understood? Subject nodded. I understand, Your Excellency. The Army's loyalty is to its nation, not ideology. The general's fate. Ironic, isn't it? Poor Shepinov looked up from the bottom of his cell, only to find himself looking up at Mikhail, the small outline of a smile on his face. What is it? Asked Boris, too tired to even begin thinking of the comedy of the situation. Personally, it is ironic that a strong man like yourself, after having forced this role on me, has, in a twist of fate, been imprisoned by the same man that was forced to become their leader. Is it a Shakespearean comedy, or perhaps a tragedy from where you are? Poor Shepinov smiled at the Tsar, but the creases of his face revealed that it was not a smile born from genuine pleasure. That is true, Mikhail. It is a comedic in its outcome, and still can be, if you rule the way I think you will. Boris laughed a little, but not for a long, short silence replaced the bitter laugh. So began Boris. His smile is gone. Are you just going to gloat, to bask in your glory, O great wonderful Tsar? Actually, said Mikhail, his face still upturned in the shape of a faint smile, I'm here to tell you that you are being released to the Manchurian city of Harbin, from where you are able to live a hopefully more filling life than when you lead now. But you'll never return to Russia for as long as I live. I guess, said Boris. I should be glad you didn't execute me, and yet I don't. Mikhail didn't respond, instead retorting and walking away. May he find redemption either in himself or in his works. Ivan Mikhailov, the former Minister of Finance, and the man who helped save the empire from its own power-hungry military, was dead. For all the energy he had expended during his gambit against General Shepinov's clique, it seemed that a stressful ordeal left Mikhailov with nothing else to give. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Yeah, blah blah blah, very... I did not know Mikhailov for long. When I first came to Russia, this is his eulogy, I assumed he was like all the others, a delusional old exile who only intended to keep me under lock and key. For years I had no reason to doubt this assumption, until one day in my garden, the Tsar's voice cracked. His voice began to feel heavy. His lower lip began to tremble. No, be strong, he whispered under his breath. It was the day that I learned that he was not like the rest. Mikhailov cared for me, and he cared for Russia. I owe so much to that man that I could not possibly express it through words. Mikhail clenched his teeth, as he felt the tears welling inside his eyelids. I wouldn't be the Tsar I am now without his help. You must all remember him as He couldn't hold back any longer. Mikhail burst into sobbing. His emotion is exposed for all empire to see. His bodyguards came to guide him off the stage. The next speaker took the floor. Memento mori. That was a good guy. And then I just stood this focus. New white movement. In the dining room of the Tsar's palace, 3 of the most powerful men in the country sat together at a table. However, it wasn't simply a pleasant meal. It was a meeting to determine the very future of the institutions of the empire. All due respect, Tsar Mikhail. If we proceed with democratic elections without delay, the people have waited long enough, and I fear the return of the protests, Volganov explained. His face was a little sad, but determined. He'd long since decided not to let the brutality he had seen in response to the previous protests go on in vain. Mikhail nodded, considering this before turning to Sobchak. Do you have any wisdom to share yourself, Antali? He asked, gesturing at Sobchak with his fork. Certainly, Tsar Mikhail. I'm afraid I must wholeheartedly disagree with my associate here. It was an election with political parties, without political media, without even many people prepared to run. Sobchak paused for a moment after posing this rhetorical question, a small smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Instead, we should have a civilian provisional government to prepare the people for a modern democracy and solidified democratic institutions, of course. Ultimately, the choice is yours, my Tsar. Setting down his knife, Mikhail thought very carefully for a few moments. Ultimately, however, he came to the decision: provisional government. Yeah, I would also probably do that if I was in his shoes. Just for, like, the people to get set up for a few years and then go for it. But I can very much see how that could get taken over if I die at a weird time or something. Keeping the torch lit. For such an important announcement, all would agree years later that the method in which it was delivered was surprisingly subdued, surprisingly solemn. It was, however, respectful of the political weight that it carried and of what it meant for the nation as a whole. Tsar Mikhail, seated in full regalia and with a long-practiced poise, spoke to the camera clearly and directly. His ministers, soldiers, airmen, and other civil servants had, in his name, secured control over almost all of Russia proper. They defeated fascist, communist, bandits, and more, and they returned security to millions upon millions of ordinary Russians. It was therefore only natural that he formally announced his claim to the long-vacant imperial throne, and thus his government's claim as the successor and reincarnation of the Russian Empire. To many within the state controlled, this would seem almost academic statement. Mikhail had been called Tsar for many years, even before he had secured power over the white officer cliques. But politically and more importantly, internationally, it was anything but. The claim had been made and the gauntlet thrown down. The only thing remained to be seen. What was the response or challenge from the nations of the world would be? Who can doubt the Tsar's claim? Also, I'm a little confused, there's a lot of Siberian people here, and they're also Russian. But is it more like there's German people and also Lorraine, but they're still French because they're just French ruled by France, but ethnically German? If that's the case, the Kazakh people are also Russian in the imperial way, I guess. I don't really know if that makes any sense, what I'm trying to say. Don't touch that dial. Sergey, this is just, yeah. Yippee. Authoritarian democracy is now what's ruling. And also, that was just, it's the same martial law has ended in the places that we just conquered, or that we've conquered before. It wasn't that interesting to read, really, so I'll just let you guys not have to. Dear Father, it's probably been ages since you last heard from me personally. I apologize for not writing you sooner, but know that it was not for lack of trying. You see, my life has become rather complicated as of late, and to lay the story out in its entirety would be a daunting task. Indeed, I write you now not only because of the time that has passed, but also because you've likely seen the news by now and are confused beyond belief. If not, I will try my best to explain the situation. As I'm sure you're aware, I decided to stay in Australia after my service with the Fleet Air AIM arm. My life in the so-called land down under was relatively carefree, and I look back on those days with fondness. Sadly, it was not the last. Several years ago, I received an invitation by influential Russian images in Harbin to attend a banquet celebrating the legacy of our family. One thing led to another. Yeah, got crowned Tsar of all of Russia. Despite their generous show of goodwill, they kidnapped me. No matter the circumstances by my birth, a Romanov would never shy away in cowardice when his divinely ordained realm needs him the most. With the help of some like-minded allies, I seized power from those corrupt white generals, became the Tsar I was always destined to be. I understand if this worries you, but know that while I did not choose this fate, may my soul be damned if I don't make the best of it. Our family's honor will be restored. I will make sure of that. Signed, Michael Androvich.
Thank you so
Oh, damn! Russia has been finally unified into the Russian Empire with Mikhail II. In the future, he will march on Moscow, but not in this playthrough because it's the same content in every path, and that shit is boring. So thank you for watching this Russian Empire unification path, and have a good day or night. Well, I just realized I probably got none of that, but thanks for watching, and this is my unification.